And we're back. So, here's the thing. I've got the perfect. I fell asleep there for a little bit and had myself a nap, so I'm ready to go again. And I have the perfect. Hang on just a second. Let's make it a little quieter. So, I have the perfect. Modern introduction to C++. Excuse me. So, where are we at here? Okay. Now, if you don't know by now, there is a thing called GPT. Okay. Whoa, Adam. Easy with GPT. That's newbie programmer talk right there, buddy. No. GPT, excuse me. GPT is a tool, okay? Just like your IDE is a tool, just like your Notepad is a tool, just like C++ itself is a tool. And you're going to write a lot of tools along the way. You're going to need a lot of tools along the way. And you're not going to be able to write a lot of these tools along the way. You're not going to write the IDE. That's ridiculous. We want to write as many of our support libraries so we don't have to. I commented on a video that was explaining to use other libraries because that's the smart thing to do. Well, it is if you want to avoid work. But if you want to avoid dependencies where when you upload your libraries to GitHub to share with the world, you're not going to want all these dependencies because your end users are going to have to install each one of those. You can't. Some licenses will prevent you from including their source. It's basically got to be MIT or Apache 2.0 source, and I'm not sure, but even with Apache, you might have to state that you made no changes. I'm not even sure. But there is licensing issues and all that. So to avoid copyright issues, to avoid your end user having to go and add all these dependencies, you want to avoid using them in the first place and try to include that in your own coding if possible. Now zlib is a huge exception. Almost any library that's using compression, almost all of them use zlib. And we're not writing our own compression libraries here. We're not writing our own codecs for video. We're not writing our own model form. Well, actually, we are writing our own model formats usually, if we can get that far. A lot of people didn't get that far. But they didn't have GPT. And GPT wasn't any good at coding until basically I sat down and taught it. And I'm not kidding, because I would start with a concept and I would work with this thing for a month. Me and ChatGPT learned C++ together. Me and probably not a whole ton of other people. What's this? We got a comment. We cannot avoid Uranus. We must go through it. The Pegasus 5000 can pent water through the gas and ejaculate the astronauts. Right. So this sounds like a good game idea or something. I'm not sure. But anyway, maybe we could write that up with C++. What do you think? But anyway, so if you don't know what GPT is, go to chatgpt.com, get yourself a free account, and learn to start using it. I asked it to teach me C++ just to see what it would say, to see if I left anything out. And I also wanted to ask it about that return zero question. So here's the results, okay? It talks about variables and data types. This is where we were, okay? We did int x equals whatever, 42 is fine. So the auto is actually an automatic type. It will automatically seek out the type that you're trying to do, because in modern times, just looking at what it is, remember how I talked about this right here? This is a double, which is pretty much the same thing as a float. It's very this doesn't have the F, but if it did have the F, it would absolutely know it's a float. With the decimal place there, it's even putting in the syntax highlighting. But with the decimal place there, it can pretty much tell it's a float. It can tell the difference between a float and an integer. And it's smarter now. It's smart enough to know that that's a float without that additional F. There's also constants. You can set constant integer to equal 100. And then you have a constant expression of minimum and it's evaluated at runtime, okay? The control flow, okay, this is what we were going to talk about next. The if-else, switch case, for loop. I kind of like that it's showing a for loop. The for loop is probably the most commonly used loop, aside from a while loop as your main loop. Loops are exactly what they sound like. Instead of exiting the code procedurally, like line, 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 etc., going past that, what a loop does is go back through itself over and over until the conditions are complete. With a while loop, it's pretty much a trap. It pretty much stays in while loops for the most part. Do while loops are just a while loop that does itself once before it evaluates. And switch cases are a little more complex, but they're just like basically the same thing as the if and if else and all that. Function parameters. Now I told you I'd teach you how to write functions. And you remember, int main, well, this is int add. And it has some stuff in these, what do you call them? The curve? I don't know what the heck you call those. But I will look that up as well. But it declares a couple of member variables, I guess you could call them. It declares a couple of variables in its function call. And you can pretty much tell what this does. If you look at the int main, then you look at this, you'll start to realize you could actually use this to just add stuff up. Where was the example they had? They had an example for that one. I don't know. But, man, where did they have the example for that one? Anyway. We won't get that deep into it anyway. But, so this is a function. It returns the product of a plus b, which is just two parameters that you pass into it. The way you'd use that, actually we can write it right here in our code. We can write it right in here. We'll just go ahead and copy and paste it in there. Function overloading. Oh yes, the int and the double. Okay. So there's something else you can do with functions called function overloading, which means to say that you make two functions, and based on the information you pass to it, it'll just choose, because these are fundamentally different, they they get they get well, they actually get overloaded. Uh, it redefines. You see +1 overload. It redefines it and gives it different possible types, original types. And the reason you do this, as opposed to just saying auto like that, is because these variables here. Now, what you could do is this. But you see, it has an issue with that. It could be that it's already defined. Hang on. Now, the reason it has an issue is because the auto is not allowed there. Okay? So that's why you still need this. And there's another reason for that as well. It's because if you were to pass this in, what are you passing out? Just because you passed in doubles doesn't mean it can interpret sending doubles back. It's an auto. It doesn't, don't think of it as automatically choosing the type as much as just automatically storing it properly. It just basically finds the lowest amount of storage it can. And because of that reason, it can actually be very unoptimized to use in certain cases. Most of the time, though, it's probably not, the compiler is pretty intelligent. As long as it doesn't get too complex, it can probably handle it. But this is function overloading, and which means that you can pass it either integer values or double values, and it'll just choose the one it needs based on that. And C++ can do this in a number of ways. Overloading, and that is basically how inheritance with object-oriented programming works. So it would work like this. And then we need a couple of, we'll say, so it's interpreting those as integers. You see that? If I hover over them, it's interpreting it properly as integers, even though it just popped up as a double before I was finished. Now, if I was to make these doubles, now you can see that it chose the double. Okay? I know that it's hard to see the way I have this set up. There you go. Now maybe you can read it a little better. There is actually a way, but I don't know if well, maybe it does get a little bigger. So depending on the values you pass to it, it just goes ahead and chooses what you need. Auto can help, but it can't be used here. So what you could do, this might be fairly optimized. I don't know if it's going to allow this. Probably not. Oh, it does. Okay. So now you see it's actually choosing the proper, but that actually might make the compiler take like an extra step. However, it could save you a lot of time, especially if it were just, say, a demonstration like this. It may not matter to you whether the compiler is doing something or not. In most cases, this would be completely improper, and the number one reason why that would be improper is because it's not readable. The number one thing you want to do with your code when you write it is make it very clear and very readable. We're not, I mean, yes, I said I'm going to help you get to a game engine in a game, but aside from that, most of the programming you might end up doing might just be a bunch of little tools that you use yourself, and the sloppy code might not be a big deal as much as functionality and the necessity to have it like now. GPT is getting better and better at coding, and the new version is going to be even better. It's $20 a month, so it's you know, I don't work for these guys or anything, but it's a really good deal for what it can do for you. A lot of people think that it's not any good at coding, and like I said, until recently, it wasn't. But over the summer, me and GPT, we learned some things, and I happen to know for a fact that I, when you use GPT, sometimes it'll give you an option, and it was to help shape the new GPT. It was here when the big fad of GPT came around, and at that time, this thing could not code. It understood what C++ 23 was, and it wasn't even out, but it couldn't code it very well. And it uses proper methods, but it can leave things out that might otherwise be necessary. Anyway, the point is in the last 7 months, I helped to build the new GPT, doing what I do. That's just a fact. I'm not the only one, of course. It's me and everyone else because that's how large language models work. But I can tell you personally, I worked with it day after day after day for 7 months straight. And this thing was learning as we went. And they added features to it like the consistent memory and the bio profile that allows you to stuff more information into it so that each prompt is closer and closer to what you were trying to do. And if you set it up right, it doesn't take a whole lot. But if you set it up right and it learns from you after a couple months, you take that memory, dump it into your clear out the memory, and keep working with this thing. It already knows because I've worked with it enough, and other people have worked with it enough that it understands code quite well. And it probably was a whole lot better at yeah, you can't say things like that here, dude. You can't be saying things like that, bro. Look, I'm gonna give you one chance. All right, I'll give you one chance because maybe you didn't know. I've not said it yet, but those kind of comments will get me flagged, and this is more important than you or I, and especially more important than your dumbass comments. What are you even talking about? What do you want, man? Anyway, back to a functional world. So we were going through the functions. And it was showing function overloading. Then we get to object-oriented programming. Now, usually when you are taught object-oriented programming, they teach you that they teach you about inheritance, and they show you animal, and then horse and fox and etc. Or you could even divide it in domestic and non-domestic. Uh, but this is a proper object-oriented example. It just shows the creation of a single object, a rectangle. And it shows how this class rectangle, which is just a container, this is one of the hardest concepts in C++ for me to understand. And it's one of the easiest to actually truly understand. Um, a class is a container, but it's a special kind of container. Namespaces, remember I told you we're rock collectors, and a namespace is like your bucket? Well, a class is like a toolbox in that it's got special compartments. Um, these special compartments I'm talking about are the default constructor and destructor, and this was a even more difficult concept for me at first. I didn't really understand initialization or why you had to initialize. I didn't understand that classes were kind of a generic container, but at the same time, they have very special functionality that comes with a lot of overhead because they have uh, like a public. Hang on, I gotta take Okay. I had to check on something. The family. Oh, I didn't realize the door closed. I like it open like that. And it gives me a little background. Anyway, so I know it's a little silly. It's a bit of a time waster, but let's call it a little bit of a matinee. I am going to go back on break here just for a second. Habits. Just so you don't worry about me. Because, you know. So, we will be right back. And we'll get back into this. You can take a look at this for now. All right. Oh, what? What? Oh, it must be minimized. Oh, where is it? That was strange. Okay. Oh. What? How did it do that? Oh, was I on the... Okay, that's how. All right. Okay. So we were looking at this. So, a class can have variables, it can have functions, it can have functions right in its definition that are kind of inlined. It can be so what that allows you to do is you'll notice that these are the same, okay? And that's basically declaring it. So this right here is outside. It's outside the scope of the int main. Everything that exists in this entire program that we write, it's going to travel inside this function. Anything that's outside of it, like this, is going to have to be called like that. This is known as a forward declaration. Normally you would declare it though. This is the declaration. So what we're doing is we're calling to that object, and then we're creating our own named version of it. And if I were to say put that in a loop, it would say that I was redeclaring it. It's the same thing. Let's try this out. And here's the cool thing about the comments I showed you. There is a shortcut key for that. I don't know it. I just kept doing it without it. It doesn't work that good. I prefer these. Anyway. Excuse me. So, what we got here is now you see how it's color coded, and it does this. See how great Visual Studio 2022 can be. I believe VS Code now does all this same exact thing, but it took them a while. I think even the IntelliSense, it may not be fully implemented, which you don't need it fully. Obviously, this is all pretty simple code, and you're actually looking at, a lot of people would say or might think that this gets harder than this. It does. It gets more complex than this, but this is as hard as it ever gets, pretty much. With modern C++20, you're looking at it. Because as complex as this gets, the most complex file in my core of my engine is something to the effect of this. Let's say, well, rectangles are squares, but squares aren't rectangles, right? So, and parallelograms they're not squares, but I think they could be rectangles. Or at least squares and rectangles are both parallelograms. Let's go with an easier example. So, because this is the kind of way that C++ gets more complex. If we're going to talk specifics, that's where it gets complex, especially in modern times. Okay, so let's say we're going to do class animal. All right? In animal, we have to define whether we're using public or private members in a class. Functions and variables can both be public and private. This was a way to separate the code in the past, and then they had something called friend. Oh, how did that work again? I believe it was like a friend of. Ooh, what would that be a friend of? Well, let's try something, just for the fun of it all. Let's say we have a class like a dog. Yeah, we'll make dogs special. Dogs are special. So let's say that dog is a friend of animal. Actually, let's try something here. This has to inherit. This has to be, ooh, man, I like this code already. This could turn into something. So, it's got to actually be, and like I said, we have to declare. So, it's going to have to be, yes. Now we got a problem, see that? Let's actually see, here's the thing. Okay, I don't know. I don't know about friend, because friend was what messed us up, and they told us not to use this. It's writing my engine. You see this? What do we got here? Secret value. Oh, okay. So friend allows you. Okay. Friend allows you to, like, grab values right out of its debugger. That's interesting. Debugger does reveal secret. Already they're saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. You're right. Friend never worked. Anyway, inheritance does. What's going on here? Oh, because of this. Now, you need this extra little colon here, not semicolon, but the colon, to do this inside. Now, if you're up here, it's kind of in reverse. And this is like, you see how that's different than what I have here. This would be like, and we don't have to say int, we say auto. Now, in this case, auto's going to help us. How? Well, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What's an int? Right? What am I doing? What? I don't know what I'm doing with this value. I don't know if I need it to be a float. I don't know if I need it to be a bool. I really. Int is just where I start. So if I put it on auto, that thing could switch from int to unsigned to double to, maybe I use a number that int couldn't even handle. It was too large. So it just chooses unsigned instead. You see? It's useful. So it's not allowed inside of a class, apparently. Well, that's because I think you can't deeply nest auto. Auto is used very simply for, you'll notice, watch. You'll notice this. Works fine now. Why? Because this is a very simple variable. In here, it is a member variable. Well, it's not necessarily a member, but it is part of that class. It is a variable contained within a class, and that's nasty. Now, modern CPP, this is going to blow your mind. This is why everybody thinks I'm writing that. Everybody that writes C++ now writes C code. No. Watch this. This is the amazing struct from C code originally, except that now it's so simplistic that it kind of acts just like this space. So you have to name it. Well, actually, can we do that? I think we can. I think because one is a struct and one is a class. No, maybe not. Oh, it's the auto. Huh. Oh, what happened there? Oh, I guess not. Well, you can't nest auto anywhere, apparently. What about inside of a function? Should be able to, because that kind of acts like that. Yeah, see, okay. So why in a function, Adam? Well, functions aren't aren't containers. Does that make, well, they are containers, actually. I lied. But they're not containers in the sense that struct and class are containers. Complex containers. A function just fires its own scope. It's really not the same. Clearly, auto works in a function. And that only works in global scope, normally. So, functions are exactly like global scope, except that they're not. Unless the function is declared in global scope, then it is. I wonder if we can see that. Okay, yeah, it's getting early in the morning. Yeah, I said this wasn't gonna be the while loop stream, but you know what? Let's cover that. We'll save this for later. Control Shift C, was it? Oops. Oh. Uh-oh. Okay. Control Shift. What was it? It was Control Shift. No, that's not it. Well, anyway, I'll just do that. We'll learn what that is before we'll just save all this code for later. And go back to our example. And we're not going to worry about all this code. We'll just say that it goes through and it does all this junk. And then we're going to have our loop, our main loop. It's going to go into our loop and it's just going to stay there forever until we shut it down. We're going to cheat. And we're just going to say, do this. It's just going to print that string. It's just going to print that string over and 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 over. Okay? That's what a loop does. And this right here. Oops. This right here. This is super typical. Even inside of an entry point library, you might just find that. That's what most people call application.h or application.cpp in their code. That is the entry point. And that is basically an engine. What it is it's an update function. Okay? Watch. It's a constantly running, updating function, just like an engine would have. And that's literally what drives the center of an engine, is a single loop. Well, it might be multiple loops, but they're constantly running and they're swapping back and forth. That's pretty much how every single program works. Okay, that's why this was next in the tutorial. But after going through, I keep hitting the wrong window. After going through and talking to this thing, now this is how you shouldn't have it writing code for you. You should write the code, and then when you go, oh man, I need to change the name of my class. Oh, by the way, classes usually go in their own files, but we'll show that in the next. We'll get involved in the static library and show the inclusions and stuff. I forgot what I was talking about there. Anyway, we'll cut this short. And I'll review everything again. I might even write a script for the next one because it's hard to make flow to this whole thing without one. And the interesting thing is there's AI that does all sorts of stuff, and some of them are very good at scripts. And we're going to be getting into something called AutoGen. And AutoGen lets you do multiple AI all at once and automate it. But we need an API key for that. So that might have to come later as well. So until then, guys, gals, creatures, whoever, aliens up there watching 15 billion light years later.